Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webcast discussion today, 25 years after Beijing, Women's Leadership in the MENA region. Today, the Middle East program of the Wilson Center commemorates 25 years since the Fourth World Conference on Women and the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, with a discussion of progress on women's leadership and empowerment, particularly in the political sphere. We're honored to be joined by three women experts from the region: Dr. Hala Al Ansari, Secretary General of the Supreme Council for Women in Bahrain; Dr. Salma Nims, Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women; and Dr. Mehrinaz Elawady, Director of the Gender, Justice, Population, and Inclusive Development Cluster at the United Nations and Economic and Social Commission, ESCWA. We look forward to all of your insights today on women's political participation with a focus on leadership and decision-making. The Wilson Center's Middle East Women's Initiative recently published a report on women in leadership focused on the public sector to see not only where women are and assess representation, and their participation in decision-making in the executive, legislature, judiciary, national security, but to also see how much decision-making authority or how much power they have in those positions. We often see women appointed ministers to portfolios that now are called feminine portfolios, such as the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Development, while other portfolios such as defense, economy, industry are traditionally go to men. One of the most important conclusions of our work in this particular study is that women are more than ready to be at the top tier of government positions, particularly in the public sector. In countries like Jordan, the UAE, in Tunisia, women are outperforming men in tertiary education. However, there are still many challenges in female labor participation. As a region as a whole, the MENA region continues to have one of the lowest female labor participation rates in the world. And that makes it even more difficult for women once in the workforce to get to leadership positions. So to better understand these dynamics, to see what progress has been made and what challenges remain, we've put together this panel. And I'm going to start with the Kingdom of Bahrain with Dr. Hala Ansari. Thank you very much for joining us today from Manama. So Dr. Hala, 25 years after the Beijing conference, where does Bahrain stand from your perspective on women's political participation, but specifically leadership and decision-making?
Yeah, so I was saying, allow me first to thank the Wilson Center Middle East program for organizing this event on 25 years after Beijing, Women's Leadership in the MENA region, and for inviting, of course, the Supreme Council for Women in the Kingdom of Bahrain to discuss its national efforts and prospects at this event. There will be a few slides running alongside my remarks. So I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Embassy of the Kingdom of Bahrain in Washington for facilitating this participation, as it falls in line with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs efforts in cooperation with the Supreme Council for Women to shed light on the Bahraini Women's Day 2020 theme of the role of women and diplomacy. We had hoped that the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women would come under more stable and safe conditions to review the progress of women on the global level. However, despite the difficult challenges of the global pandemic, we recognize its emerging opportunities and the need to adapt and adjust to the new normal in order to accelerate the recovery process and continue with our national development. As a defining framework for development and progress, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action outlined 12 critical areas of concern. And even after 25 years, it remains a powerful source of guidance and inspiration. Nevertheless, in order to continue benefiting from the declaration that encourages and supports sustainable progress for women and girls worldwide, we have outlined a number of strategic perspectives as follows. First, the need to set in place flexible follow-up and evaluation measures that takes into consideration risk factors and exceptional circumstances like what we are facing today. Second, update the periodic reporting methodology to encourage and sustain knowledge management and transfer by highlighting best practices and success stories. Third, allow for the alignment of national efforts and terminologies with international expectations and outlooks for fairer benchmarking when identifying the effectiveness of national policies on women and girls. On a national level, today's event also coincides with Bahrain's midterm review of its national plan for the advancement of Bahraini women ending in 2022. This strategic document has realized early on, when it was first developed 20 years ago, that national development will not be possible unless the operations are based on the principles of equitable participation of women and men in public life, and that women's needs are mainstreamed in the national development programs. Indeed, the commitment demonstrated by the Kingdom of Bahrain towards the advancement of women is deeply enrooted in our history, through which the progress of women is characterized by its early beginnings in education and participation in the municipal elections, in addition to early economic participation in vital sectors of the labor market, such as the health, banking and finance, justice, engineering, etc. As a result, our country has witnessed escalating progress in women's participation in decision-making positions, as women today in both the public and private sector have attained notable positions, namely ministers, ambassadors, parliamentarians, chairperson of financial institutions, and recently the election of the first woman Speaker of the House in 2018. There is no doubt that what has been achieved in the Kingdom of Bahrain is a source of pride, but it also represents a great challenge to work on preserving and sustaining these accomplishments towards more progress in a future that predicts many challenges, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. Dr. Salma, I'd like you to give us sort of also a quick snapshot of where we are at in Jordan 25 years later. I know that there was a recent cabinet with the new prime minister, with 3 women ministers appointed out of 32. So there are challenges, but I know that there's also progress. So would love you to give us the view from Jordan.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm very proud and honored to be speaking among such honorable women from our region as well. Actually, I want to start with talking about the general situation when it comes to political participation in Jordan. I mean, definitely Jordan has started early on on the issue in supporting women's political participation, whether in elected bodies and in her participation in the public sector. From 2000, we have an allocated quota for women at different levels of elective bodies, from the local councils to the parliament. It increases in every law. The latest election laws did not increase the percentage for women. It's 15 seats out of 130. And we are expecting to have the elections next month, in a few weeks. And we're hoping to see more women to win also competitively. Women in Jordan has, improved themselves at the political level. They improved themselves in decision-making levels. We've seen them, in our Beijing report, advancement in women's in position-making has increased, whether it's in the courts, whether it's in the government. But when it comes to the government, you will see that it is erratic. It is not a sustained commitment that the government is being made up with a political decision that we want to have, except in Omar Razza's first cabinet 2 years ago, when it was obvious that he made a conscious decision. He wanted to have an increased number of women. But as he went on, we could see that the number of women in every change decreased. And it seems that he could not hold on with this commitment, because it is really, when you look at how that it comes down to broader political problems and challenges that we are facing. Actually, also another challenge that we faced, we feel sometimes that there are pushbacks. The Senate was selected by His Majesty this few weeks ago, and again, it was below our ambitions. The percentage is 10% this time, which is lower than the percentage of women now in the parliament. We have, in the last parliament, they were 15%. But also the king has chosen for the first time, I think it's the first in the region, a judge for the Constitutional Court 2 weeks ago. And also 2 days ago, he selected for the first time his personal counsel on policies, a woman, and actually a young woman. So you see that we do not have consistency. We have some laws, sometimes we have, when it comes to the public sector, and this is where I want to just focus on, we feel that there is a problem in the entry, sustainment, advancement on women in the public sector. And we know that this is the maker, this is the factory of leadership. We know we have women in leadership in the private sector. We know we can have women have proven themselves even in local community that they are leaders, and they are leaders of change and initiators and decision makers. They are in the security sector as well. But when they start looking for leaders to select for ministers, they do not find women, because they are not sustained in the public sector. They do not reach the highest level of decision making in the public sector to actually have a pool of these women. So this is one of the problems. Then we do have to ask ourselves, why we don't have women in this highest level? Women end up leaving and retiring early from the public sector. Sometimes they are forced to retire, and sometimes they retire themselves, because after 15 years of work and having to juggle between their life and their private life and their children, and we go back to the issue of gender roles and that they are still divided in a stereotypical way, then she's too tired to actually reap the fruits of her experience and expertise and her knowledge and take the highest level position. Another problem we see, which is related to, and it has been rising, and we see that even some women activists do not run for elections or shy away from high-level positions. Why? Because the social media in the past few years has opened up a new form of violence that women are facing, which is political violence. We see that every woman who is chosen for a high-level position is attacked before they know who she is. They start looking into her private life. They start looking into her history. They start dissecting her abilities and qualifications. And of course, you know, I myself believe in freedom of speech. So how do we balance between freedom of speech and how this attack is affecting women and making them shy away from running from elections or from taking a leadership position that might affect their families? Because we are still a country and a society that believes in our privacy, in our having a kind of level of courtesy towards women. So we find that we are going through kind of a chaotic situation where women are able and where we have a certain level of political will at the highest level that gives messages that women deserve, that they can do it by choosing them for such position. But we find that still the pushback and also the inability for women to continue, specifically in public sector. I don't want to talk about the elections because you're focusing on the public sector, because there are other issues related to the elections that hold back women from either running or being able to run an effective campaign. But in the public sector, we find that women are also suffering, and I want to close with that, from the organizational culture as well. We have recently adopted our latest national women's strategy, which has a few pillars related, one pillar related to women participation, but we have an important pillar related to institutions. And within this pillar, we focused on gender mainstreaming within the government. And this is where we are hoping we will see real change to create the right environment within the public sector for women to have equal opportunities, to have the right environment that allowed them to continue and thrive, and to be able to reach high-level positions. In addition, of course, to mainstreaming gender in policies, and of course, having data, other issues related to gender mainstreaming. So we have to have a sustained frameworks that create the right environment for women to continue and be able to lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salma. And I think some of the points that you touched upon also support Dr. Hala's presentation, particularly with regards to raising awareness amongst women and making sure that we are publishing success stories, because those are important in showcasing or role modeling that women absolutely need before they enter public office, particularly in parliamentary elections. We're going to turn to Dr. Mehrinaz, who's representing ESCWA, to also tell us about sort of the view from your agency on all the work that you've been doing in this particular field and political participation in the region, and what are some of the tools that have worked and what are the challenges that you still see ahead for the region 25 years after Beijing?
Thank you, Marissa, for such a vibrant and very interesting discussion, and for the panelists. And I would like first to start by putting things in perspective and providing a regional overview of the socio-economic situation of the region, because the status of women in general is part of the whole. You cannot talk about political participation without talking about the entire socio-economic situation in the region. So first, I want to say that we have recently at ESCWA estimated that the region is going to lose about $42 billion as a result of COVID-19, $42 billion. And this is mainly due to the measures taken to absorb and mitigate the impact of COVID, including either the lockdown or the closure of airports and malls and stuff like that. This resulted in dramatic decrease, for example, in oil prices, which amounted to $11 billion, and losing about 1.7 million jobs in the Arab region. And these numbers, by the way, they increase by the day. So we cannot say that these numbers are fixed. These numbers increase by the day. And almost about additional 8.3 million people are going to fall into poverty. Okay. So taking this into consideration, and this, if I would call it bleak situation, how do you expect women's situation, overall situation to be? It's never going to be better than before. It's not better than men, especially if we know that women are the majority of those who had lost their jobs, that 66% of working women work in the informal sector, which is most affected by COVID. Okay, they've lost their jobs. They don't have any social protection schemes. So how do you expect a woman who had lost a job and is experiencing increased violence, domestic violence at home, would go to vote, or would go and apply for a senior position, or would even run for election, okay? Let alone running for election, which requires a lot of money and budget and support and all that. Add to this the pre-COVID situation, which my colleagues and dear friends, Dr. Hala and Dr. Salma spoke about. So add to these new challenges, the old challenges that we all know, either the socio-cultural barriers and the patriarchal society, the institutional barriers that resulted from legal discrimination and all that. In addition to the new situation, the overall situation is not looking very good. However, I would like to say that we do have two pictures. One picture is the situation pre-COVID and the situation after COVID, okay? I would like to say that prior to COVID outbreak, we had some very good success stories. We had some gains that we need to stick to and see how can we improve and how can we build on. And very quickly, these are women in legislative, in the legislative. Women in the Arab region in the legislative, they present about 16.8% compared to very minimal if we compare this like 2 decades before. However, this is still yet below the global average, which stands at 24.9, okay? But still, we've progressed a little bit. Women in the executive, they remain women underrepresented in the executive, with most Arab countries having appointed 1 or 2 women. However, some countries have made serious achievements, and some countries have reached about 30%, but as Dr. Salma was saying, it's not sustained. So at one point you would find 30% of the cabinet as women, in another point you would find it dropping to 2% or 5%. So it's not sustained, but we never reached 30% in the past. So this in itself was progress before COVID. Women in the judiciary. The number of female judges had significantly increased in the Arab region, and you have some women, especially in countries like Algeria, Lebanon, and Tunisia, have almost or approaching to reach parity. But what is most important than reaching parity is institutionalizing this progress. And here I have 2 very good examples and promising practices from Bahrain and Jordan, and of course my colleagues can talk more about them, but I wanted to shed light on that. In Bahrain, for example, the first female judge was appointed in 2006. However, in 2016, just 10 years after that, you have female judges occupying 9% of the judicial post, and with good representation throughout the different strides and different channels. Such improvement have been reached due to several things, mainly the state intervention, the state support, as Dr. Hala was saying, the advancement, the national strategy of the advancement for women, which ends in 2020, had explicitly highlighted the importance of women in the judiciary, and more important, that the state had launched in 2014 the Judges of the Future initiative, which aims to train 30 to 35 male and female graduates to prepare them to join the judiciary. This in itself is a great success when you have it institutionalized and when you have the government supporting that. Jordan is another example. They jumped from 48 in 2009, 48 judges in 2009 to 211 in 2018. So almost in 9 years had doubled and tripled. And again, this had been because of the institutionalization and not only increase in representation. So we have in 2000, King Abdullah formed a special commission to modernize the judiciary and increase the number of female judges. And we also have a quota of 15%. Okay? So these are some of the measures that are important to do. Women in the local councils. We have Tunisia, for example, where women make up about 47% of the local council positions in 2018. But what is most important than numbers is the new forms of participation that had emerged in the previous couple of years, and especially after the uprising, like, for example, having women being represented for the first time in the panels and writing the constitution, for example. This was never the practice in the past. Having women represented in national dialogue, like Yemen, 30%, that was never in the past. So these new forms of participation are really promising, and we need to stick to and hang on very tightly to them and build on them. However, I'll go back before I end my intervention and say that we cannot separate this part from the whole, from the entire. Okay, so we need to look at it at its entirety, and we need to find a way to have a comprehensive approach to be integrated in the country's national strategies. We have been at ESCWA recently advocating for a new approach called a solidarity tax. And this solidarity tax, it helps decrease the gap between the poor and the rich. We found that 1% of the richest taxes is enough to close the poverty gap in the Arab region. So I would say we can have thematic solidarity taxes and have one for the Arab region, focusing only on women empowerment in general, economic and political empowerment, and that would be a leap in the performance that we're doing. I'll stop here and be open for questions. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehrinaz. This was very enlightening, and thank you for shedding light also on the different case studies. I think a running theme that I heard from all 3 of you is sort of this issue of sustainability and the importance of institutionalizing this progress, so that, you know, just like Dr. Salma mentioned, we don't see these ad hoc appointments that keep changing over the years. And it seems that the judiciary is a good example. So Dr. Hala, I'm going to go back to you with that particular question, to understand a little bit more the role of the Higher Council for Women, to ensure that this progress is institutionalized, and that we're not running through basically the same challenge of these ups and downs in women's progress. So in addition to the example that was just given with regards to the judiciary, how else does Bahrain ensure that there is sustainability and continuous progress?
Actually, it took us 20 years to reach wherever we have reached today in Bahrain. The council is considered young if compared to other national missionaries around the Arab world. It was established back in 2001, and it was established in a very clever way, I would say. It is considered as an advisory council for His Majesty the King, who happened to be the head of all three branches. So basically, the Supreme Council for Women has this privilege of being close to the decision maker and being able to address all issues related to actual gaps taking place in the society. So during the 20 years since establishment, we learned a lot as a national machinery. And I would give credit to the Beijing Declaration, because it focuses in one of its 12 areas of concern, the role of those national machineries. And we were able to establish something that works for Bahrain. And since the early starts, it was very important for us to have a national strategy that tackles the issues and the concerns of the Bahrain society at the time. Because back in 2001, we didn't have a minister except for the general secretary who was heading the council. And things got better over the last 20 years, but it wasn't by chance. We tried to institutionalize the aspect of women in the development process of the country. So today we have what we call a national model in order to govern women needs in each and every field in the country. So for example, when we say that stereotypes still exist, I mean, what is the source and what are the reasons of still having the same stereotype towards women, that they should take care of the children, they should do magic when it comes to balancing out between home obligations and work, and as if the man is sitting there watching this scenario taking place. So we have to go to the grassroots of the matter and look into what are we teaching our children in this matter? We as mothers, what are we teaching our children on this matter? Is the religious institution is being responsible enough in order to address those sensitive issues in societies, in order to have a new generation who would consider looking after children as a mutual responsibility and not an exclusivity for women only? Did we look into what the media is telling our children? Did we look into what the political setups are doing in this regard when it comes to pinpointing gaps and addressing certain issues that would require a general discussion. So we did some progress when it comes to, of course, having women in cabinet or in the parliament, et cetera, but there is a huge gap between what happens in the society and what happens up there. And we can't keep dwelling on the fact that we are still facing a stereotype problem when it comes to me and you, Marissa. I mean, we've been there in the field for the last, how much, 20 to 30 years, and we are still saying that basically the society don't understand the needs of women till when? So we need to look, that's why the Supreme Council for Women, when we were working on the national plan, we tried hard to include those aspects in order to make sure that we are working bottom up, not the other way around. Because we see things improving when we fill certain gaps in legislations or in policies, or improve the corporate cultures or the institutional culture by putting or enforcing certain rules here and there. But I don't think that on the long run, it will complete the picture without addressing what's happening down there. I mean, I can't force a boss in order to appoint women without him being convinced about this caliber, or about that women should be looked at in terms of their qualifications rather than their gender. That's why here in Bahrain, we avoid talking about quotas, and we prefer that things are being addressed in I don't know, under the umbrella of qualifications rather than gender. So this is just a hint of how we worked on the matter.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. I think those are all very important points that, you know, like you said, there's change that could be led and prompted at the top level, but without the societal change that has to come from the bottom up, it becomes, that gap will continue to exist. And we see that gap in various societies around the region. So I want to turn to Dr. Salma, because I know that the Jordanian National Commission for Women, correct me if I'm wrong, but is not a government entity. It's sort of semi-governmental, and that allows you to work with civil society in order to I guess, address that sort of bottom-up move. And I wonder if this sort of designation as a semi-official entity helps you better connect the social sector or the civil society sector with the top leadership, and how you're able to slowly close the gap between the top tier and the grassroots level.
Okay, thank you. As you said, we are the national machinery, and we are considered semi-governmental organization. We get our budget from the government, but we do carry out our lobbying and advocacy campaigns through our partnerships with the civil society organizations. We build our even our approach to building plans is actually done in a consultative manner and consensus building manner with the community. So two very important examples is our Jordanian Action Plan for Women, Peace and Security, which was adopted in 2018, but it was actually developed through a broad consultative process, which included the security sector, the public sector, and the civil society organizations. And now the implementation of the plan is actually carried out through all the pillars that of the plan, parts that are which are the government and the security sector are implementing, which focuses on women in decision making, but also there is a strong part for civil society organizations that actually, and I would bring COVID-19 here, that I believe that despite all the challenges that COVID-19 has brought us, and actually, as I agree with Dr. Mehrinaz, it has a lot of, it's endangering all the winnings or the achievements we had, but at the same time, it opened the opportunity to prove that actually women in local community and CBOs play a very important role in crisis, in times of crisis, especially during lockdowns. So a lot of the initiatives came from the grassroots. Some of them were CBOs, some of them were women groups that were from the neighborhoods and local communities. So even this has brought to attention that the local level of leadership, it's still important, that it brings down the localization concept of community peace, women, peace and security, and that leadership happens at the local level as well as at the highest level. And it showed that women are leaders in our community, and we need to build on that. So now, through the drone app, we are mapping all these initiatives, not only the formal ones, but the informal ones, to build on them and see how we can continue to reach out to them when we plan for response. Now, also the National Women's Strategy was built in a consultative manner. And I want to bring back to what Dr. Hala was saying about changing, I would say, social norms. Again, the National Women's Strategy has a pillar on fostering positive social and norms and gender roles to be more accepting of concepts of equality, gender equality. This is a goal in our national strategy, and it looks at the multi-levels. It looks at the top-down level, which is related, for example, in this case, to education. How can we has the educational sector contribute to that? But also it looks at the grassroots level. How do we create positive gender relations in the families? And then it has the meso level. We're looking at how there is a role for the media, role for the informal sources of learning, and also, as Dr. Hala mentioned, the role of religious influencers. I don't want to only talk about formal religious leaders. Sometimes the religious influencers come from a blog or from a YouTube channel. So we look at now, we are connecting through the national strategy, the top level, including also legislation, but also we are recognizing that we start from the family through positive approaches. We need to move away from confrontational messages that would actually have people have a pushback and impact pushback. One campaign that we did with the civil society actually 2 days ago, and it's very interesting because when they were, in Jordan, every time there is a change in the cabinet, people start making assumptions and then rumors of the list of the cabinet. And it's usually, again, the rumors go around the usual, ex-ministers, people in high-level positions, ex-parliamentarians. And usually it would have 2 or 3 names, female names, and you mentioned Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Tourism, because in Jordan, Ministry of Tourism has historically been, in the last few years, held successfully by women. But by the way, I want to focus that the Ministry of Social Development is one of the most difficult. And I think the idea of feminizing it is not really, the concept. It's actually about equality for Jordanians, not only for women and men. And the issue of social protection is a huge topic that we need to look at, especially under COVID. But this is how they come. It's about, okay, who would be the Minister of Social Development? Who would be the Minister of Tourism? So we had a campaign with Amman Radio. It's Radio Al Balad. It's a community. Radio. It's not a commercial one. And we asked the Jordanians through Twitter and Facebook to make up a cabinet of all women. And of course, the idea was that we will force people to think of Minister of Interior. We would force people to think of Minister of Justice. And by the way, you mentioned education. Sadly, in Jordan, Ministry of Education is always held by men, although education is led by women. So I don't know why. So there was some actually reactions on social media that was, what do you mean a cabinet of all women? And are you calling the prime minister to do that? Of course, we are not calling the prime minister to do that. We wanted the people to do that. And it was really trying to bring women leaders to the forefront, not only those who are always in the media, but also to give them these unusual portfolios. Ministry of Planning, although we had the Minister of Planning before, but not continuously, Minister of Finance. And I told them, I was on many radio interviews yesterday before the cabinet was formed. And I said, well, if you see a picture of all men cabinet, does anybody get shocked? Of course they don't. Nobody wondered why the picture is all men in suits and like there is one woman here and one woman there and usually sitting in the back. And I told them, but now because we reversed the picture, you suddenly cannot accept the idea of one gendered cabinet. So maybe it's time to feel that we are shocked, that we have to be shocked if the cabinet is all men. So this is really something, and this I'm happy that we do this. We always carry out our campaigns with the civil society because we believe that the civil society has better outreach to local communities. We work at the national level. We don't have divisions in the rest of the country. So without the civil society, we are unable to reach the community. We don't even know who they are. And this is how we carry out our consultations in partnership with the civil society. And I think in the past 2 years, these experiences have helped in bridging the gap between the government and the civil society, because usually, traditionally, they look at the national machinery that it is only a representative of the government, it's a defender of the government policies blindly, and this is not the role. We need to advocate. Even if we get our budget from the government, we need to keep reminding them of the issue of gender equality, especially in times of crisis, especially in times of our economic problems. We had them before the COVID, we continue to have them. So because women at times of crisis sometimes are they stop becoming the priority. They think that it's not a priority now, we need to focus on our problem. Why don't you think that during these problems, you need to respond to the most vulnerable needs? And you need to have women and vulnerable groups, because not all women are vulnerable groups, but all vulnerable groups, migrants, refugees, people with disabilities, older generation. How do we represent their needs when we're planning to respond to a crisis if we do not have this diversity and representation on the structures of decision making? So this is what we are pushing for.
Yeah, thank you for sharing also the example of the campaign. I mean, this is obviously a sentiment that is shared globally, because we see sort of images of not only in the political sphere and the public sector, but we see the same images here on boards of Fortune 500 companies, where women are always a minority. But like you said, this reaction that you got is probably the exact reaction that you called for, this, shocking and awing the society, in order to get them to rethink what we are so conditioned to see over time. So hopefully those campaigns over time will actually make a difference and slowly change people's perceptions. Before I turn to Dr. Mehrinaz to also sort of address how ESCWA also works with the social sector to push for this sort of advancement on all of these levels, I just want to remind the viewers in order to ask questions, please basically tweet your questions to Wilson Center MEP, and we will address them shortly. So Dr. Mehrinaz, I just want you to also sort of share how ESCWA, I know that you work with government representatives, but how else do you also include your work with civil society and the social sector?
Hi again. And the way we do work is that we start by doing evidence-based research where we look at the region, sometimes looking at specific cases, success stories or so. And we do case studies on that. We come up with key findings that we are comfortable saying this is how the region looks like, because there are great differences of course between the region. It's not very homogeneous. And then we take these studies and these findings of the studies and we do support the countries. We turn them into training materials. We do regional workshops to support them. Either if we're talking on political participation, we've done a couple of that. We bring, and then we go on the national level. In Lebanon, for example, last year, we've brought all political parties together. That was a very interesting exercise to see the dynamics and to see all this happening. And then we move into having projects on the ground. And we come up with a package of an advocacy messages that we try to promote in the region. And when it comes to political participation, our key message is the comprehensive approach, as I was saying. Economic, political, all goes hand in hand. And the second thing here is to institutionalize the approach. Okay, so if you have initiatives that are not institutionalized, you're going to go nowhere. You will have just one-time success and that's it. We also advocate for legal reform, like looking at the constitutional reform and the legislative reform, and then policy reform. So one feeds into the other, okay? So a constitution should inform the legislation of the country, all have to be gender sensitive and all have to take into consideration women's political participation. You've seen after the uprising, several of the new constitutions had articles on women political participation and even went to the extent of having quotas like Egypt. And then from the policy reform, you go into having something very concrete on national strategies for women. Believe it or not, now, as we speak, we do have few Arab countries that do not have a standalone strategy for gender equality or for women empowerment or whatever you want to call it, okay? The majority do, but few still do not have. Also going into thematic national strategies to address key challenges in the country, either a strategy on violence against women or a strategy on whatever the key problem of the country is, and then turn these into programs. So this is what we're advocating for, like going from the constitution to legislation to strategies to programs. In 2017, I believe we've done a very interesting exercise on violence against women. We've looked at, for example, which country in the region have the full package, have a constitution that prohibits violence and have a legislation addressing violence against women, a national strategy, programs, and budgets. There was none. We found countries with legislation, or a country with a strategy, a country with budget, a country with 2 or 3 of them, but the whole package was not there. But this is now changing, okay? Now we do have a big portion of the Arab countries having strategies on violence against women, having legislation. Last month, Kuwait issued their legislation on violence against women, which is a great success. So we're moving, okay? This is what I'm trying to say. However, step back, step forward. We need to be more steady. Thank you.
Thank you, Hala, for that. Mehrinaz, sorry, excuse me, for your intervention. So you sort of prefaced one of my questions that was coming with regards to COVID and how we've already seen how it's affected women in the workforce in the United States. Recent numbers that came out last week also showcased that more than 600,000 women in the US have lost their jobs for the very same challenges that you've pointed out, basically childcare services being unavailable, no alternatives being put forward for women, and once again, childcare and other domestic chores automatically going for women and making it basically more difficult for women to work from home. And for others, when there were cuts made due to financial constraints, impacted by COVID, the first to go were also women. So we're not looking at a MENA specific phenomenon. This is quite global. We're seeing it here in the United States as well. But in the region, beyond just the job loss, we've also seen, unfortunately, a surge in gender-based violence. And Dr. Salma already talked about how local communities have proven to be most successful in ensuring that this issue, this problem is addressed. But as a UN agency, and I want to start with you and then move to both Dr. Salma and Dr. Hala on this. Beyond just working with all the different entities at the civil society level and governments, how else do you address this, particularly in times of crisis, when the focus of the government, in particular, is more on containing the pandemic itself, and then also limiting or trying to mitigate the economic impact? How do you make this a priority and put it back on the agenda?
First of all, what's unique about the work ESCWA does is that we have the convening power. So we bring Arab states together. And this is something very unique that we always make use of. And this is a place or a platform where member states provide exchange experience and best practices. This in itself is a great success. Having a country that is still facing a specific challenge, talking to another country that was able to overcome this makes a great difference. Okay, so in addition to the convening power, we collect all this information in a knowledge hub. So I'll give you a very simple example on the COVID outbreak and what we've done. We've developed a tracker, a very unique tracker on social protection. Okay, and this had looked at the fiscal space and had looked at social protection, had looked at women, had looked at women with disability, persons with disability in general, and what are all the measures that countries have taken. We brought countries together. Okay. They've learned from this experience and we're updating it as we go. So this is one of the key things that we do. Another thing that we support countries in doing is the analysis and the projections and the estimation, which is very important, and providing them with various scenarios. So as I was telling you and colleagues at the beginning of my intervention, we've done estimation on how much the region, Arab region, is going to lose due to COVID, which is $42 billion. Okay, this is an eye-opener. And then this is a very simple example of what we do, and we've done a lot like that. And then we start giving countries scenarios. What exactly can you do, and what are the specific measures that you can undertake to help mitigate the effect of that? We're looking at, for example, the participation of women in the economy in general. Which sectors are going to be impacted by COVID? How can women maneuver within the same sector? Because it's very difficult if a woman who is 40 or 45 working, for example, in the education sector for 30 years, to ask her to go and work in the, I don't know, health sector or infrastructure or whatever. So how can they build their skills and go? Which sectors are going to be affected more? Which sectors affected less? What is emerging? What are the new sectors that are going to emerge? And how can women be part of this fourth industrial revolution and be able to cope with that? All this at the end is going to feed into women's political participation, because as I said, this is part of the all. You cannot treat women political participation in separation or isolation from the other aspects of the society. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do need women at the decision-making table in terms of crisis and in all the crisis management committees. And I'm focused primarily now on COVID in order to ensure that all of these issues are actually being taken into consideration, that somebody at that high table is raising that issue. Dr. Salma, I recall, I follow you on social media, And I recall you voicing frustration at the beginning of the pandemic with all the lockdowns in place in terms of how this is affecting women in particular, but vulnerable women. And we've seen a few cases in Jordan, as well as in other parts of the region, that have been quite worrisome about this general trend. How was it, just if you can talk a little bit about that experience, sort of making the case to the government at the time that this is a growing concern that has to be addressed beyond just having the local community reach out to address all of these different challenges that we saw?
Thank you, Marissa. And actually, to be, that was one of the toughest times we went through, actually. Despite the success that the government in controlling responding to the pandemic, especially in the first few months, Jordan was at the forefront of having the right, setting in the right procedures, the right responses, even with the issues of the help, the financial and the packages. They were at the forefront. They had the database, they used the NAF, and actually what was very important that it wasn't only given to Jordanians, it was given to people living in Jordan from Gaza, children, married, Jordanian women married to non-Jordanians. So it wasn't only based on just the Jordanians as per the definition. But unfortunately, and despite the fact that we have a Jordanian action plan for women, peace and security, which this is a space where we can use and optimize on, we were not on the table. It wasn't only just the Jordanian National Commission for Women, the Council for People, Higher Council for People with Disability, the National Council for Family Affairs, and also, as you mentioned, I think Mehrinaz has mentioned, we know, as the rest of the world, women and children were expected to suffer from violence, from increased violence. From the beginning, we were very systematic. We had, first of all, as the Jordanian National Commission, with the support of UN Women, we immediately wrote a policy brief to the government. And it wasn't only highlighting issues, it was proposing mechanisms. Is how do we include the civil society and the women mechanisms to be represented on the table. And I have to say that unfortunately there wasn't response in terms of mechanisms, but there were issues arising, and we had to leverage our presence to push for response. For example, the closure of for a while, the closure of daycares were fine as long as there was a lockdown. But when the private sector opened, and they kept the daycares closed, there was a very, it was coming from everywhere, from women, from civil society organizations, from us as the national machinery, that we have to have solutions for working mothers, because in the end, this would have a very bad impact on working mothers, because they are either forced to take unpaid leaves, or they are forced to work part-time, or they are forced to be, they would be leaving jobs. Of course, I have to say that some of the defense orders helped in stopping, in dealing with some of the private sector, for example, some of the private schools, especially not the highest level, highest paid school, but the medium and more smaller private sector schools were actually making violations against teachers, female teachers, left, right, and center, not giving them their salaries. And that was an area where we worked. And I think that was one of the success areas where we worked with the civil society organization. We have an initiative called قم مع المعلم, Stand Up with a Teacher, which was a group of female teachers in the private sector who have been organizing and mobilizing themselves in the past 5 years now, or 4 years, and we support them as a national machinery, and they mobilize themselves to push for to register all the violations, to make the lists, taking it from teachers all over the country. They would prepare the list and we would send them to the government and push for the government taking action against these schools. It wasn't an easy thing, but this is one of the, I would say, success stories. We still have many challenges, but we managed to do that. But you know why this was successful? It was successful because the civil society, this movement was established before. It was well established, well trained, and it had an excellent relations with us as a national machinery. So we had the right channels to work together and push for the solutions. And that's why we need to continue to work in a sustained manner. We cannot be reactionary in our solutions. For example, now we are suffering again. All schools are now working from home, are online. And what would working mothers with children under the age of 12 do now? For example, flexible hours have not been, although it has been adopted in Jordan for the past 3 years, but it is not adopted by all private sector companies. But what I want to say, and I'm proud to say that from 2019, Jordan has adopted the Women Economic Empowerment Plan. Okay, it was a plan which was designed in collaboration with the donor community in order to ensure that there is synergy and collaboration and coordination on the issues that we're working on. So it became the umbrella, and that was prepared when the MGF, the Mashriq Gender Fund, was established by the World Bank. But we insisted that this cannot be only about the Mashriq Fund, because if they don't have all the money, then we will end up with a small part of the plan. So we talked about a comprehensive plan that looks at policies, looks at how we support the private sector in adopting the right measurements, and to have the tools looking at the pay gap, to issues related to sexual harassment at the workplace. And now this plan, for the past, since 2019, we have, despite all the problems, we have been coordinating its implementation. ILO and UN Women also have a major fund from I think the Swedish government to contribute to its implementation, and we coordinating the implementation. We have not stopped working on implementation. So we are developing the tools now. We have tools, which is the private sector is a very important partner in this. We are creating tools that pilot assessing pay equity, and in order to ensure that the private sector sees the benefit of pay equity and the response to it, not the big companies, because big companies are doing well in Jordan in that aspect. But how do we get the medium-sized companies, which make up more than 95% of the private sector, the medium and small, to see that this is actually beneficial to them? So we continue to work despite the crisis, and we take into consideration what the crisis has revealed. We're learning from it, and we're working on other solutions. But we are suffering now. I think the issue of children in kindergarten learning online doesn't make sense. And some of us, some organizations are practicing helping women by letting them work from home. But actually, how could a woman work from home while her children are also studying from home? Actually, it's really asking for the impossible. Something has got to give, and we have to find a solution. We're hoping that this cabinet would have a better vision and would be more open to our suggestions and solutions in coordination with the civil society and the private sector.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Salma. Dr. Hala, if you can also comment from the point of view of Bahrain on basically how also you've addressed the challenges that have been unfortunately heightened by COVID-19.
What Bahrain did is not that far from, for example, what Jordan did for women in their country. We are currently going through a huge research exercise in order to look into what happened after the hurricane will pass. Because currently we have so many solutions on the table. The salaries were supported, rents were subsidized, women were allowed to work from home, kids are studying from home again, but we are talking about what will happen next. Do we have a proper recovery plans or not? We should go through the exercise of re-engineering every single aspect in the way we deal with our lives. So what we are currently focusing on right now is to study the effect of the stimulus measures, for example, that the government put in place. We are studying the impact of the public spending on, for example, certain aspects in the society. Were we successful in taking certain measures to help women in order to adapt to the digitalization pressure that we are going through? Basically, we are running our life remotely from each and every aspect, whether in the field of banking and finance, at schools, at work. E-commerce is basically enforcing the way we shop right now. So we are trying to focus on how can we bridge gaps between the new trends and women. We are seeing certain industries that are dying. What's the future of women in industries like the aviation industry or the tourism industry or any industry that is being affected by COVID-19? And what is the future of the youth who have studied and carry certain education specialities in areas that are being dying or so we are talking about so many challenges that we need to address in quick recovery plans in order to make sure that women can cope with what's coming. So this is mainly what we are trying to do right now in Bahrain, and this is being executed with a university here in Bahrain. And we want to come up with solid ground information in order to convince the public sector, the private sector, and us as a national machinery in order to put priorities for moving forward.
And that is very important given how this pandemic, which was basically, a global disruptor, has already changed the nature of work, as you said. There's a lot of remote work. How will this look like, post pandemic? So I think it's great that you and the Higher Council, and particularly in Bahrain, are looking at not just how to tackle the challenges that you're dealing with today, but also how to look forward and assess the damage and see, well, as you said, like what are the sectors that will continue to be relevant, because many of them will not be. So we have a number of questions that came through. I think I will start with one here by Brooke Sherman. On the topic of women in leadership, one of the messages that we've heard was the necessity for women to network once they are employed. So basically it's about the role of networking and men in promoting women to leadership positions. How can women basically learn from the male experience of networking, which is key in promotions and reaching leadership positions? Dr. Hala, would you like to take a stab at it, and then we'll hear from the other panelists?
I mean, MEN has created an amazing model so far when it comes to networking, and we see how successful this model is in making things happen in their world. But I don't see women establishing a similar network. Maybe we lack in this field in particular. I always feel and believe that sometimes we don't behave as mentors. Probably we either don't have the patience or we don't have the, for example, the solid platform in order to, or we don't have the time probably in order to behave as mentors. We do it subconsciously while working, but we don't dedicate our time in order to do it in a proper manner the way men. I mean, I see that men have such a luxury. For example, I think we need to work more when it comes on how we can network and try to cascade our experiences and talk bluntly about the challenges that we face as women and connect with the network of men and try to have a mutual ground between us and men and learn for them. For example, Dr. Salma mentioned earlier that the number of female ministers are dropping in the cabinet, and it is a similar case here in Bahrain. So we don't know why such a thing is happening, even though we are talking about institutionalizing our policies, our plans, our programs, and advocating about the importance of women participation in those fields. But when it comes to forming a cabinet, we see that our show up in such a platform is really is very weak. And it is the same when it comes to women in the parliament, of course. So I think we need to work more in this field and have something strong getting established among us in order to prototype it and I mean have it as a model and showcase the success stories of such a gathering, for example.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I know you said that this is a challenge for many women to take up mentoring, but do you get an opportunity to do some mentoring, whether internally at the higher council or with others?
Yes, we do that when it comes to reaching out to women or women reaching out to the Supreme Council for Women when it comes to the services that we provide to our community. But I mean mentoring young females entering the field of work, or mentoring them in order to pick and choose the right degree. Now we need to work more towards such an issue because we're seeing youth being lost there because of what's happening in our lives. So I think we need to orchestrate our efforts in order to reach out to the youth, in order to reach out to young females trying to find their way in those turbulent times.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. Dr. Salma, same question with regards to the importance of networking and how can women harness that power?
Yeah. First of all, I think we women do network. Now, I want to look at this historically. Now, if you look, especially in the Jordanian context, the men's club and the older generations men's club are closed clubs, and they are clubs of older men who were historically in high-level positions, or they are considered community leaders, like high-level representatives of their own families or elite groups and tribes and different, and this was traditionally a men's club, and that's the thing. Now we are having more multi-gendered networks. As now we look at the economy has changed. When we're moving to the knowledge economy, the new sectors, you look at now the sectors that women have entered, you will notice that the networks are actually now a bit of a class division rather than gender division. So yes, we have networks that are either with different genders, and they come from those who have been like the recent entrepreneurs, the ones who have benefited from the information technology field, and those have their own clubs. I would say they're not clubs, but I'm calling them their networks, which are actually they support each other, but also I have to say some of them create initiatives that have opportunities for younger men and women from less privileged communities. So, and that's why we see, for example, that the ICT sector is providing jobs which are in customer service, in customer support, in local communities. So, so it is a bit of a class division when it comes to networking, but also they are creating some important initiatives for the younger generation. We also have some networks for women in leadership positions, which are doing, again, they are actually, we have some of these networks. In a way, again, we are considered similar to the old men clubs, because we are all women who have already reached these positions. But the importance of these networks that are also creating mentorship programs. The IWF, for example, chapter in Jordan, for years had a program, a leadership program, where the women in the IWF were all women with experience and all ex-positions or current positions, would actually give leadership programs to girls and young girls from all around the country. JNCW has a fast leadership program for women in local councils and governance boards, where we have also got mentors for women with different experiences, some of them in leadership position and some of them from different qualifications, and we match them as mentors with these women. And one of these mentors is now the Minister of Industry and, by the way, Industry and Trade, who has been selected yesterday. And she was a previous minister, an ex-minister, and she was very generous with her time to do this mentorship. So I actually think that women organizations and women networks do more mentoring than men organizations. We also have some programs for the leadership for the youth, who ask men and women in leadership positions to contribute to the leadership programs, where we give sessions, talks to the young, we meet them, we mix, they ask for our experience, and in many ways they have those experiences gives them the opportunity of internship with us. For example, JNCW has a few of its younger generation of people who started as interns, and then they became volunteers, because the volunteers are paid. And then when we opened up positions and they applied like everyone else, but these applications because we knew them, because we knew that how they have already become part of the organization, they understand the culture, they had better chances of achieving. So I think it's not that gloomy, I would say, the issue of networking, but in the end you have to be qualified. The sad part is that there is a difference between giving opportunity to someone because of his connection or because who his father is, and they don't have any qualifications, and between leveraging these networks with qualifications. And then, you get the opportunity and you prove yourself and you get there. So it is not an easy situation in a country where we are suffering from an economic, really difficulties in the past few years. And since the crisis that appeared in the region around us. But again, I think there's still hope. But the number of men and women who are entering the pool, who are graduating in the pool of those who are looking for jobs, is so much higher than the number of job opportunities that are available. And then this becomes very competitive, and you need to actually prove yourself. And sadly, the educational system is still not giving them the right skills to respond to the needs of the market. So they need to build their experience, and that's not very easy. And sometimes in our mentorship programs, we tell them that we also went through that. We did not have experience, so we worked, we volunteered, we started with jobs way below our qualifications. But once you prove yourself, you have to do. We cannot enter from a high level expectation, but we have to understand that we do have a social classification and financial classification now, and this gap is really affecting men and women from the marginalized areas because they don't get the same quality education. So and it's unfair to them, to be honest,
Thank you, Dr. Salma. Yeah, you've touched upon a number of challenges that face the region, not only the women, but particularly the women, with regards to, as you mentioned, the skills mismatch, and the important role of mentoring to also ensure that youth graduating from tertiary education are equipped with not only the skills that are needed in the market, but also the skills of the future. And the vast majority of those skills are sort of primarily, referred to as soft skills, or I like to call them essential skills. But that's part of it is also how to network, how to leverage your network, how to learn on the job, learning by doing. So all of these are important, as you said, for both young men and women. Dr. Mehrinaz, if you can also comment on this issue of networking and role modeling as an important role or important factor in increasing women's leadership. And then we will have one more question before we wrap up.
I think Dr. Hala and Dr. Salma had responded adequately on that, so I'll just try to tackle it from a different perspective and add just few things. Networking is important, and I think men were able to network not because they do have strong skills in networking that women do not have, but because there are many men who were able to reach to senior positions, and by default, if they're going to network, they're going to network with each other. Like if I'm a CEO and I'm a man, I'm going to network and I'll be networking with another man because there are not many women as CEOs. Okay? So it's natural in their positions due to the fact that they were able to reach that. But what more important than networking and is mentorship, which my colleagues had referred to, and this could be a very complex aspect, and it could be as simple as that: get your chair and come sit next to me and let me show you how we're going to do that, and providing like on-the-job training, which is very important and key to junior people and fresh graduates, and they need that to gain confidence in themselves. The last thing that I want to shed light on is the positive deviance approach. I think this had been an extremely successful approach in many countries on how to have a role model showing how they were able to come from a negative situation to a very positive situation, how they were able to succeed in an area where other women, for example, were not able to do that. That would be an inspiring experience for them. So this positive deviance approach and showing that if I were able to do it, you should be able to do it. This is also very important in addition to networking and mentoring and all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehrinaz. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to sort of ask one last question for final thoughts from each one of you. And since we were already on the topic of mentoring and youth, looking ahead, just very simply, if I can hear from each one of you about what inspires you in your current work when you do talk to the youth that you, through the different projects that you're working through, and what is one thing that you would leave them with, a piece of advice moving forward, because they will be inheriting many of these challenges that we face in the region. Dr. Hala.
Well, I'm a mother of 3 children who are, the youngest is just entered university, and my eldest is a lawyer, 27 years old. So I'm dealing with the youth from within my household, and I see the hopes that they have for their future, and sometimes I get really frustrated when I see how COVID became a nightmare for them in order to fulfill their dreams. Because let's be frank, what youth were facing before COVID was seen, and we know how to handle, and we have enough programs in order to tackle what they are looking forward to. But with COVID-19, I can't explain for my daughter why she is not going to campus. She wants to experience the university life. She wants to get to know new friends, see new faces. But since the university started, she's sitting in her doomed light room and trying to get in touch with the world. So I see their frustration, and I really want, and this motivates me, by the way, in order to wake up every morning and go sit in my home office. I won't say my actual office, but in my home office, trying to think about how can the Supreme Council for Women help in this regard. We have so many programs, we have so many policies, we have so many legislations put in place, and maybe if we are going to talk about it, it will take us maybe a month or so. But it's about coming up with new ideas, trying to meet the challenges, and trying to address the matters and the issue the way that they see, not the way that we see. Because it will make lots of difference to wear their lenses and try to come up with new solutions. For example, a business woman was talking to me the other day and telling me, listen, I can't sell. I can't reach to my market. How can I do this? How can I do that? And even though fintech in Bahrain is quite mature, and we are seeing so many services in order to facilitate the people's access to finance, but still women are finding it difficult in order to enter to their markets once again. But with time, we are trying to come up with ideas with the private sector, of course, in order to make things easier for the youngsters. Many girls that I know are thinking of studying and working at the same time. It hasn't been the case before that, because they are seeing one of their parents losing a job here or losing an income there. So you can see that the culture in our country is changing. For example, my daughter is doing more than a job at the same time, because she has the privilege of working or doing business from home with the virtual business, etc., etc. So yeah, basically what the suffering of the youth is motivating me in order to continue doing what we're doing, but in a different manner, in a different way, whereby we can speed the process of recovery for them.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. Dr. Salma?
Actually, to me, I always, every time I speak to the youth, I tell them that although I go speak to big panels all over the world, and I always feel more nervous speaking to the youth, because I think the youth challenge us. Challenge what, because after 20 years of experience in a certain field, somehow you become accustomed and acquainted with what you take things for granted, you assume things, you forget the questions, and I think that the youth challenge us and challenge our ways and how we do things, and they push us to do things differently. And to be honest, this year was one of the turning points for me and for JNCW to see that we actually need to reach out more to the youth, because even the women movement in Jordan has become basically of an older generation, and we find ourselves unable to connect with the youth. And in some when some of the violence issues that were raised, we saw the youth wanting to go to the streets, call for change, but we realized that we do not have a common language, although we are the feminists, the older feminists. And so I find that now we are developing programs that creates better channels for communication with the youth. Listening, it's about listening to them as well as giving them from our own experience. But definitely we lost the view from their perspective, and it's very refreshing to have this. One thing we are doing now as we speak is because we also have a fatigue by the youth, well, all the Jordanians, from the democratic process. We don't feel that the elections are bringing new people. And basically, if you don't bring new people, you don't have new change. So we are now engaging with the youth to actually build what they are, their political agenda. What are the priorities that they want to ask the political lists, the candidates lists regarding their issues, not only issues related to women, but what are other issues they are interested to know about. We have a program now that we're doing this, and then we will getting the youth to the field according to their governorates and areas to actually get the answers from each list in order to document it. And then these youth groups who show that they are committed to this, we will include them in our meetings with the parliamentarian committees later on, right, where they can hold them accountable. We need to get them politically engaged. So this is something that we are doing now.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Mehrinaz?
I'll take it one question at a time. What inspires me about youth is that amount of hope I can find in youth, the way they talk, the way they try and not try, the way they find actually solutions for each problem in a very creative way and thinking outside the box, that sometimes I completely personally fail to do that. So this is a kind of inspiration that I think we need, and having both youth, more older people, people with more knowledge with the youth, put them together, I think you will get the best product ever. You've asked about the piece of advice that we would give to youth. I would say invest in education and learning. This is the key. And by education, I don't only mean the education, the formal education system, but formal system, outside the formal system, courses, training, mentorship programs, whatever you can, because education and learning is the light that we're going to see at the end of the tunnel. This is our way out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mehrinaz. So we're going to wrap up. I want to thank our distinguished panelists, Dr. Hala Al Ansari, Dr. Salma Nims, and Dr. Mehrinaz Elawady, for their time and today, and for sharing their expertise and experiences. This was a great conversation, a very rich discussion, and we hope to continue the discussion moving forward. Hopefully we'll be able to host you in person at the Wilson Center in 2021 and continue this important discussion. Thank you for all our viewers, and keep following us on Twitter at Wilson Center MEP. And thanks for all the AV team and the MEP team for helping organize this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. في أمان الله. مع السلامة.
Thank you.
Thank you all.